how-tos, looking at best cases, and I think it's really, it's a book, if you're involved in planning in towns, which I see a bunch of you here are, I think it's really a must-have. And without further ado,
thank you. So, yes, I we work on street design, which is when I in college years ago, in January. And there's a psychotherapist named James Hillman, a Jungian, who has written a book called "We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World is Getting Worse." And he's written another New York Times bestseller called The Soul's Code, in which he talks about both a Jungian theory and a theory that goes back to the Greeks and the Romans about people being born with a purpose in life. And the Greeks and the Romans and Hillman and Jung all say that this really often shows itself at 11 years old. And so we have a lot of architects here. A lot of architects know Frank Lloyd Wright's mother used to say, oh, I gave Frank horrible blocks, and he became an architect. Hillman would say that actually Frank Lloyd Wright was an architect, and therefore his mother gave him horrible blocks. And for those of you who know his work, you can see that in fact it did seem to influence his work. When I was 11 years old, and I might add, I guess we knew New Urban, a lot of New Urbanists knew Charles Barrett, who I think worked for you at one time, Robert. When Charles was 11, he was reading civic art. When my father was 11, he was reading law books. When I was 11, I was born in New York, but I grew up in Darien. And I had a grandmother who would give me books like this, because she lived in a classic Maine house, circa 1800, big house, little house, back house, barn, that I would stay with her in the summer, and she would frequently drive around the shore and looking at what you might call the classical vernacular of New England. And also at 11 at that time was the age at which kids were allowed to take the train into New York by themselves and walk around New York City by themselves. This was about the time that it was a little bit slightly later than Jane Jacobs' Death and Life of Great American Cities had come out. Jane Jacobs was battling with Robert Moses. And I'd sometimes hear about this around the dinner table, and when I was 11, I was walking around New York City streets redesigning them. So about 25 years later, I went to a charrette down in South Carolina. It was for the developer who had built this. This is a completely new street, built by a man named Vince Graham. Victor Dover and Dwayne Plater-Zyberg had him as a client, and I was on the charrette. So I met Victor on this street, and we toured Savannah, we toured Charleston, both of which made it into the book heavily. And it was an interesting thing. We had a little charrette in the charrette to design the basic layout of the development, which was called Ion. And I was the one who won that. So my partee was the partee for Ion. And then it was interesting to watch Victor and his partner Joe Cole sit down and sort of, with a very large plan, sort of walk the plan really block by block, adjusting the streets as they went for the vista and picturesque views. And ever since, Victor and I have been having debates about they're more familiar with it down in the south because they have more of this and less of this than we have in the northeast with all the old towns. Functional classification, of course, is the road system that became the official road system of America after World War II, in which there are only 4 types of roads. There are highways, arterials, collector roads for the arterials, and local roads. And local roads, ideally in the system, are dead-end roads, cul-de-sacs. This, of course, is an arterial. And, of course, it's a system that the whole purpose of the system is to make traffic flow, like water in a pipe. New urbanists have come to talk about streets like this as auto sewers because they inevitably get congested, they're ugly, and when you have a system designed to make everyone drive everywhere, it's inevitably going to get congested. It's of course what we call induced traffic. We know that if you build a highway to reduce congestion, you induce new traffic. And we're going to see that also happens in cities. And we'll talk a little bit more about this system as we go. So we got a grant for the book, and we traveled around a lot, and we looked at a lot of our favorite old streets. We stayed in this, I guess this pointer goes out. We stayed in one of the buildings on the right there, and which was really an urban paradise. And of course, a lot of that was because of the street. The architecture was wonderful. There's a canal right there. Water is always a good way to make a city. But one of the things that made it wonderful was back in the 60s, the Dutch there was a lot of revolution going on in Amsterdam in the 60s, and part of it was already at that time they were deciding that they didn't like what the car was doing to their city, even though they had these funny little Dutch cars with rubber band transmissions and things that didn't take up a lot of room. They still went on a very different path from us, and they made it. They made the planning of the city less and less based on the car, so that when you get down to this intersection, you might notice there's no stoplight, no stop sign, no traffic signs, just that one pedestrian thing at the end, one parking. And of course, they have an enormous number of bicycles and also a lot of pedestrians because there are places where people like to walk. And so when you get to the intersection, everybody looks at each other and they negotiate who's going to get through without the red light. So, as I said, we got a grant, we traveled around, we looked at a lot of streets. We looked at streets that we had been looking at for a long time. And we made lists with friends and got their list of streets. And we found a lot of things as we traveled around, among them that Europe, like us, is having a lot of trouble with traffic congestion. But then they're also doing things we're not doing. Like, this of course is Paris, Boulevard Saint-Germain, and they've done this wonderful traffic lane, bicycle lane, where they've given half the streets are just buses, taxis, and bicycles. And this is a wonderful bike lane for what my co-author, who's an Ironman, he does the Ironman triathlon, calls middle-aged men that like bicycling. This is a great bike lane for people who want to get around the city quickly. And we're going to look at other types of bike lanes too. And so we went around measuring streets. This is one of our interns. And drawing streets. This is a very narrow street down Miami Beach. And we looked at a whole range of streets. We looked at old streets, we looked at retrofitted streets, we looked at new streets, we looked at country streets, we looked at city streets. But in the end, and parkways, but in the end, there is an emphasis on walkability that came out of this. We took the functional classification system, talked about why it was inadequate for making places where This is a place where there's a saying, never look outside the side of the dome. This is the Ponte Vecchio in Florence. Another street in Cooperstown. I'm sure you know that lanes and alleys are an important way of getting back walkability, so that you get the car away from country streets. And we had a bunch of guest authors. Leon Creer wrote about this street in Poundbury, and we put a lot of his development drawings in. Andres Guarni wrote about his favorite street in Cuba. Douglas Guarni and I walked around Orvieto, and Douglas wrote about the experience of the main streets of Orvieto. There's one of the drawings, or actually a painting in this case, for that street. And there are a lot of, Leon went through a lot of development drawings, drawing the curves differently, and moving the buildings back, moving the buildings up. But as I said, in the end, a lot of what we came down to was this emphasis on walkability. Now let me make a point about some of the photos of the book. In the very beginning of the book, we say a great street is a place where people want to be. And it's not a place unless there are people there. And then, of course, being architects, we took a lot of photographs with no people there. But that's because when you have a photo with no people, it does let you see the bones of the street. But this, of course, is a street where people do like to be. I mean, who doesn't like New Orleans and the French Quarter? This is an interesting street for new urbanists. This is a street in Queens, New York, in Forest Hills Gardens, which was a model town built by the Russell Sage Foundation. And the new urbanists realized they didn't invent what we call a transept, even though we invented the name of calling it a transept. But when you walk in Forest Hills Gardens, down at the end of the street is Station Square. And when you're in Station Square, there's a train station, 6-story buildings. The lights are not on poles, they're mounted on the buildings. The sidewalks are all concrete. As you turn the corner, you come down, and you get the sidewalk goes from all concrete to concrete and brick. When you cross the street, the walls change, and as you move down the street, the concrete and brick changes to concrete and grass, and then you cross another street and it changes to large single-family lots. And there's a beautiful, very clear transept that, in the space of about 1,000 feet, in which the buildings are affected, the sidewalks are affected, the lights are affected, the curb details are affected. And it's an interesting example. It's an interesting model to see. This is what's called a Trinity Street in Philadelphia. These are very narrow streets that were put in to the middle of the block. They're called Trinity Streets because these are Trinity houses. There are 3 floors, tiny floors, 1 room per floor. The entire house, I would guess, is something like 600 square feet. And they're put in the middle of the block, and they give you a completely different experience. And this is one thing we talk about in the book, is that the best cities have a variety of streets, which is one of the problems of the functional classification system, is that the variety is so meager. Even smaller streets, Longitude Lane in Charleston, and Legree Street, one of the beautiful streets of America, just 1 block over from Meeting Street, which seems like which is a denser street, and it's they use these beautiful trees to really make one of the most beautiful streets in America. And trees, of course, are one way of making streets. We talk about the other way, when you get to about 1:6, that's sort of the limit of a square or a piazza before it falls apart. And in America, we have a lot of streets where the buildings are too far apart, both across the street and next to each other. And so we use trees. These are beautiful London plains in Aix-en-Provence. In the Cour Mirabeau, which is another type of street that we talk about in the book, the promenade, in which you have a space down the middle of the street which is not given to the car, but which is given to the person, like the Rambla, like Commonwealth Avenue in Boston. And when in our 11 street types, the promenade was one of the types, and you'll see a little more of this. And then, of course, we talk about things that urban designers know well, like the terminated vista, which is a beautiful way to end the street, because a long, long street is boring unless there's some sort of variety to it. And one way to do it is to terminate it, or to shift the grid so that it doesn't line up, or to run the grid over a hill, and up a hill, downhill. And I was on a radio program a few days ago, and the interviewer surprised me by saying, well, what's your favorite street in America? And I ended up saying Main Street, Nantucket, Massachusetts. I don't know how many of you have been to it. It is a fantastic street. And it's part of the reason, of course, is that at one end, which is the shopping end of Main Street, it has beautiful trees. So a lot of these are gone. At the other end of the street, they're not gone, but they've replanted. These were American elms. And one thing we talk about in the book is how hard it's been the last 30 years to plant a street like this, because so many professionals work against you planting a street like this. The traffic engineer, of course, doesn't like trees because cars can run into them. Trees, you probably know, are called fixed hazardous objects, FHOs. You're a MHO, a moving hazardous object. Traffic engineers don't like us much either, and with good reason. Landscape architects, I think it's fair to say the average landscape architect today does not want to plant a street like this for a variety of reasons. One is planting 2 trees in a row is so boring and traditional. Another is, why use the old boring American elm when we have so many wonderful hybrids? And then the arborist joins in and talks about Dutch elm disease and says, well, we should mix all the trees up so that if there's a blight, we'll only lose some of the trees. But one thing that we discovered when we looked into this is that trees like this, like the elm, the American elm, the London plane, the sycamore, they grow in nature in groups. And it turns out that they support each other. When their roots intermingle, they actually support each other in reducing disease and increasing strength. So that when one tree, if one tree starts to get a disease, they actually send things through the roots that help the tree fight the disease. And of course, they make this astoundingly beautiful canopy. They shape a roof over the street. They introduce nature to the street. In the summer, they keep the sun off retail expert Bob Gibbs talks about a type of shopping plaza which is 85 feet wide, which he thinks is an ideal distance because you can see from one, when you're standing in a storefront on one side, you can see the storefront on the other side. And of course, for Bob, who's a retail expert, the purpose of urbanism is to increase sales per square foot. So he's always looking at that. And it's also a virtue for him that you broaden the street and made it a little more generous, a little more light, and you made a space where people stop and people get out of their car rather than a space that they go through. And notice this, we're going to come back to that. And of course, over on the sidewalk is a beautiful space under the trees. You can see there are the new trees, which are London Plain. And we know from studies that when people are in a town, they will gather in front of a building and they'll talk. If they're just talking to each other, they're not shopping. They will stand in front of a beautiful storefront with their back to the storefront rather than stand in front of an ugly building. And it's like the Ponte Vecchio, we love to see each other. I mean, what makes a great street is pretty simple. You want a comfortable space of the proportions we've been talking about, and if it's not enclosed by the buildings, you want it enclosed by the trees. You want it to be safe. And of course, one of the things that makes it safe is other people. And then you want it interesting. You want it to be beautiful, and you want other people to look at it. You want it to be memorable. And really the last thing is you want it to be part of a network so that you have a place to walk to and things to go to. And then as Main Street goes down, it becomes a residential street. And all sorts of lessons about how to change grade and that sort of thing. And you see on Nantucket, they usually do something which is a very traditional thing that, first of all, the street was graded as though they had no power tools, because they had no power tools. And so they were very economical in their grading and the way they approached the hill. And they had no interest in laying out a big, large radius curve with lots of regrading. They also, usually when there's at the top of the hill or slowly on these cobblestones. And when you're driving slowly, you can avoid hitting the granitopolis. So much of our modern life is ruled by the fact that people driving 45 miles per hour have a hard time avoiding hitting things, whether they're fixed hazardous objects like trees or obelisks, or moving hazardous objects like us. And a very large part of traffic engineer is simply making it faster, making it easier to go faster and faster with what is considered an acceptable death rate, which last year was 35,000 people in America died in traffic accidents. And we're going to talk about speed, and if those cars all drove slowly, they could reduce the accidents to zero. And I really think that this is going to be the next DUI. You know, when I was a kid, I can't count the number of friends of my parents who drove drunk. And this just, you can't do that today. And I think that's what's coming is that speeding in cities and is going to be the same thing, and we'll talk about that. But you notice down here at the beginning of the street, there's an old horse fountain out in the middle of the street, which they love. They decorate it for Christmas, they decorate it for summer, they decorate it for the 4th of July. And it's okay because people drive slowly there. So here's, oh sorry, that's not Main Street. That is a complete street in Florida. I'm sure many of you know about complete streets. Complete streets is a great new movement. Been phenomenally successful. They have something like 700 jurisdictions have passed complete streets, which means they're not for cars only. So they have bicycle lanes and they have sidewalks. But this road actually was paid for by complete street funding. And so this is why urban designers talk about completer streets. Because obviously this is not a street where anybody wants to walk. It's probably not a street where you want to ride a bike, although it's a good thing to have both the bicycle lane and the sidewalk. But neither one, I think you can see the difference between that and this. This obviously is a place where people want to be. This obviously is a place made for cars where people do not want to be. So a great thing is happening all across the country. There's really been a turning point, a tipping point, sometime in the last year and a half, that, we all grew up in the age of the auto. I had a subscription to Road and Track before I was 16. I've been to about 20 Grand Prix races. I've got a whole bunch of good cars. I'm not against cars, but like a lot of people around the country, there are a few things happening. One is that my generation, boomers, are moving back into the cities, and kids, the millennials, are also moving into the cities, and a lot of kids are not even getting their driver's license. Victor's son is 21 years old, lives in Miami, does not want a driver's license, which to me is almost inconceivable in Miami, but that's the way it is. But he's part of a growing number. And the other thing is that it got going more in Europe here, now it's going here too. Something like 40% of the British people live on 20-mile-per-hour streets, and something like 75% of them wish they did, which is a whole new thing. And we'll talk about why that's a good thing. Now in New York, you probably know, 9 years ago, we got a new DOT commissioner, Jeanette Sadiq Khan, and we call her a hero in the book. Because one of the things she did was she said, I'm the DOT commissioner, I own the streets, I can do whatever I want with them. And one thing she did, and she was literally one of the first DOT commissioners in the country to say, Broadway between 34th Street and 42nd Street, 1908. Herald Square, that's the New York Herald building right there, by King and White. And that's, this is the weak battery. The tower is the New York Times Tower. That's Times Square, that's where the ball drops. And Broadway at that time had these cable cars running down the middle of the street, literal cables. The cables actually were way down at Houston Street in another building inside the King and White. And you could see that people are over on the sidewalks, most of the people are over on the sidewalks. On the streets, you've got cable cars, horses, and yet you can see people feel comfortable stepping out into the street. And you can see, if you look closely, that there are no, like Amsterdam, there are no street signs, there are no street lights, there's no crosswalk. And you can see by those, and most of the people are over here on the side, but they do feel comfortable out in the street, and they go out in the street and they wait for the cable car. And obviously there's no such thing as jaywalking. Jaywalking was invented within a year or two after this. And here's just 1 year later, where New York City was going to take 15 feet from the sidewalks and put it into the streets. Just 1 year after that view. Because there was a group that is now sometimes called organized martyrdom, which, you know, the car companies, the oil companies, the brand new American Automobile Association was very important. They realized that if cars were going to succeed, they would have to be able to go quickly from point A to point B, and that, you know, that this just was not going to work. And so, right away, they started narrowing streets, and this is high math for me, but it's something like the street had been 10 feet narrower than the sidewalks combined, and it became 20 feet wider. And streets like this near where I live, here's Lexington Avenue, 1914 at 89th Street, and the same corner in 2012. And when you look closely, you see something you miss in the beginning, which they didn't just cut the stoops off, they cut these light wells off, and they even cut trim off the buildings. And so that this, from here to the curb, is literally something like 1/3 the distance of where it was in 1914. And what makes this a little ironic is that underneath this is the busiest subway line in America, and 1 block over is, under Park Avenue, is the Metro North line that, you know, I came on today. And so, if there's any place in America that didn't need this treatment, it was this. But every place in America got this treatment. So that this is a suburban arterial. Used to be 2 way, now it's 1 way. Suburban arterial made so that suburbanites can easily drive in and out of the city. Obviously at the expense of the pedestrians, and obviously you suspect that whoever lived in this quite expensive house probably got on the arterial and rode out to Long Island. And today, we have a movement going on which is very, there's an evolution going on. In the 1990s, the Federal Highway Administration got funding for bicycle specialists and pedestrian specialists. Every state in America had to have them, and many cities had to have them. And that's when most of things like bicycle lanes started in America. But they tended to work out in the suburbs on terrible streets where no one would ever want to walk, like Bird Road in Miami, or the complete street that I showed you. And they developed a bunch of techniques that are now place for a suburbanite to drive into and out of Long Beach. And Long Beach, for those who don't know, Long Beach is a real city. It's sometimes called the Brooklyn of Los Angeles. It has, of course, a wonderful climate, great for walking, great for biking. And they have been building hundreds of miles of bike lanes. But they, this is, the morbid say the green paint is to cover the blood where the car runs over the cyclist. Because this is clearly a compromise between a protected bike lane, which it is out back here, and enabling the car on a one-way street to turn left. And for those of you who experience something like this, now New York now has lanes like this. I use City Bike all the time. As you come in here on your bike, you cannot see who's behind you. And these cars on the one-way street are going quite fast. In New York, it's common for them to be going 40 miles per hour. And they're quite aggressive about taking the turn lane. I found a few weeks ago I rented a car and I went into one of these turn lanes. And before I even realized what I was doing, I was blocking the turn lane. Because it's this whole system encourages you to drive quickly because it makes it easy for you to drive quickly. And what I mean by that is, big warning signs, you can see everything clearly, big wide lanes, one-way streets. In New York City, the lights are timed so that they're faster than the speed limit because that makes it harder to have a rear end accident. And I've driven in New York City on a one-way street like this where I've driven 100 blocks without stopping. And the way you drive 100 blocks without stopping is you drive about 45 miles per hour. And of course, if you hit somebody driving 45 miles per hour, you're going to kill that person. And in order to drive 45, you need all this very visible stuff. So this is what we have in New York. And it's part of this evolution because in many ways, it's a good thing. We have these protected bike lanes. It's much easier to ride a bike in New York than it was before. Now we have City Bike. City Bike is, I believe, the most used bike share program in the world. And it's definitely true that as more bikes get out, it affects the way cars drive. But you can also see how this is set up so that people can drive quickly. I haven't measured this lane, but it's a very wide lane. You have the white plastic sticks, the reflectors on them. You have different color paint. You have striping. You can see when you're going 45 miles per hour. Unlike the obelisk in Nantucket, when you're driving 20, you don't need all this stuff. And it has things like this, which this is still a suburban arterial, now with a protected bike lane, and done in an Arbor-engineered way that allows the cars over here to be going. I recently gave a copy of my book to the city architect of Copenhagen, and I showed her this, and I said, sometimes we call this the Copenhagen lane, because actually Jan Gehl was paid a lot of money to come over to talk to us about it, and she said, oh, they would not do that to Copenhagen, because it's Jan Gehl talks about the public realm as the space between the buildings, and in that old photograph of Broadway, the entire space between the buildings was the public realm, and it was one space. With the pedestrians on the side, but it was one space. And now this has been very clearly cut up into pieces. We have the bike lane piece, the parking piece, which is out in the middle of the street, and so it becomes much more prominent. And then over in the far lane, the red bus lane piece. There's a new urban engineer named Rick Hall who calls this the separatists design like this. Where they're cutting the where even in Manhattan, the pedestrian is still over there on the side, less well off than what is probably a suburbanite heading out of town. And because of specialists, New York City actually gave this a prize for the 21st century street. And in fact, Jan Gale was on this jury. He did not vote for this, but this is 4th Avenue in Brooklyn, or maybe this is 4th Avenue in Brooklyn. And you can see it does all the 1990s suburban traffic calming techniques of, it has the red lane, the red bike lane that swerves across the left turn lane. It has lots of colors, and it especially focuses on the intersection. And it's very easy for your first reaction to think that this is lively. But, you know, this is actually a very good part of Brooklyn. And the life of the street is taking place down here, between the buildings, not at the intersection. And all of the attention here has been focused on the intersection because that's where speeding cars come into conflict with other cars, with bicycles and pedestrians. And so it's really not urban design and place making. It's not making places where people want to be. It's making places for cars to move. It's a transportation corridor to move cars now with a flashy bike lane added. And here's a normal Brooklyn street. You know, no one has done a lot of design work on this, but it's a place where people want to be. It was probably made out without an engineer or an architect. These were probably built without architects. But, you know, at the simplest level, it shows how easy it is to make a good street because the space is comfortable, the trees are beautiful. When you're not as skilled as Leon Creer, you can just line things up. The buildings, the sidewalks, the trees, they all line up. And it's a place where people want to be. So back to Paris. Paris, Victor and I were saying when we started this book, that there's been sort of an unspoken rule in new urbanism for a while that you were not allowed to bring in European streets. You had to talk about American streets. That sort of broke when we started retrofitting the big, wide streets. And Alan Jacobs' Boulevard book, everyone was pulling that out to see how you could turn, Queens Boulevard, which is 15 lanes wide, into the Champs-Élysées. And by the way, in this 60% of the accidents in New York City happen on 15% of the roads. And of course, they're all fast roads like Queens Boulevard. But so we did see both the good and the bad, and one of the good was how well they do the bicycle repairs. They have a whole range. You know, you have the high speed, you have the semi-high speed, where instead of all the engineering that we have, all the paint that we have, they just run a strip of concrete down the road. Bicycle over there, car over there, the two don't meet. There is no turn lane, there's no swerving, and it puts the pressure on the car not to take the turn lane aggressively, but to watch out for the bicycle. And Paris, you may know, is now, they have a new mayor. Paris is going to, all but a handful of streets are going to be 20 miles per hour and 12 miles per hour. The little streets are going to be 12 miles per hour, which becomes a space like Broadway where people will just step out on the road at will. And then they have bike lanes like this, protected from the street, a beautiful street, integrated into a beautiful street. You know, this is the type of street that we go to Paris to stroll on. And it's also the type of street that, unlike the Boulevard Saint-Germain, your child is safe on this bike lane. This is in Germany, which Germany has a type of bike lane, um, which they have a very broad sidewalk, a row of trees, and then the parking. And again, these are great for children. A place like Munich, children can drive all over the city in safety, which you would not do on the lanes of New York City. Although New York City is, again, they're doing some good things. This is parking on Elm Street. And they first did a tactical urbanism version in which there were white plastic sticks out on the street and everything was painted green. And then when that was accepted, they went to this, so that you have a promenade in the middle. The promenade was already there, but it was pretty desolate. They renovated the promenade, they put bike lanes on each side, and they narrowed the street by the width of the bike lanes. Occasionally in Old New York, we have examples like this. This is Ocean Parkway. You may know a few days ago there actually was a terrible accident on Ocean Parkway because somebody was driving very fast and they did hit one of these trees, now 100 years older. And, you know, it's true, trees and high-speed cars do not mix, but neither do high-speed cars and bicycles or high-speed cars and pedestrians. Now, actually, we proposed something in Massachusetts, where this is a photo of Charleston, 1875, before they had paved the street. You may know Charleston has very narrow sidewalks, it still does. And now they've moved the trees into the sidewalks, which make them even narrower, but they used to plant them out in the dirt street. And one problem since 1950, we've had this platinum plated road system where nothing was too good for our road system, and we spent enormous amounts of money. Now when we want to change anything, cost always comes up, and it is expensive. Even though we moved all the curves, it is expensive to move them again, to move the drains. And one thing that you can do, as far as I know hasn't been done yet, but that you can do is dig a trench down the side of the street, which is much better for the trees than the tree pots we put them in, because the roots can intermingle. Dig a trench down the middle, put a bike lane between the sidewalk and a row of trees, and put a permeable surface in there. You don't have to redo the curves, you don't have to redo the gutters. So there has been a lot of conflict about this, but it seems to be ending. I actually am thinking I should take this out because I actually met with Paul a few days ago and we were agreeing that this all seems to be so much easier now than it used to be. But you may know about this Vision Zero. Mayor de Blasio took a Vision Zero pledge before he came in, and so did his new DOT Commissioner, Polly Trottenberg. And what Vision Zero says is that there will be no traffic deaths in New York City within 10 years. And I know that Mayor de Blasio had no idea what that meant when he said it. And in fact, his first week, how it was going to be achieved. His first week, you may have read 3 pedestrians were killed in the same block on the Upper West Side. And his new commissioner sent policemen over there and started arresting jaywalkers. And one of them was an 85-year-old man, an immigrant who barely spoke English. And they knocked him down, they bruised his face. They hardly could have done worse public relations. And New Yorkers, and Manhattanites in particular, because Manhattanites own fewer cars than the outer boroughs, started saying, wait a minute, the problem is not jaywalking. The jaywalkers are not killing the cars are killing the people. And we want a city where we can jaywalk. And so the commissioner had to really ratchet it back. And the DOT is now struggling with what they're gonna do. And it really seems, and this is one of the things I talked about with Paul, when Jeanette came in 9 years ago, she was so far ahead of the public. And now it seems like the DOT is behind the public, and that the public is waiting for the DOT to do more than they're willing to do, which is that they just want to keep on rolling out those one-way materials. But Jeanette also was, she's head of a group called the National Association of Civic Transportation Officials, NACTO. And NACTO started because places like New York and Boston said functional classification doesn't work for us. We need our own system. And Jeanette's come out with an urban design guide. If you come to the Congress and the CNU in Buffalo, you can see a debate between the authors of her design guide, a CNU design guide, and our book. And one thing that's in the NACTO book is this wonderful thing of, this is what the driver sees at 25 miles per hour. And this is what the driver sees at 15 miles per hour. And, you know, I'll say it again, we all grew up in the age of autos. I've owned 3 BMWs, a Mercedes, you know, I like cars. But the more you look into this, it's really shocking to see that the driver going only 25 miles per hour, which is slow, sees less than half what the driver recording 15 sees. And obviously part of what he's not seeing is, you see right there, there are 4 people over on the left of the photo, and they're not showing up in the 25 miles per hour one. And a few things happen when you go down to 20 or 15. First of all, the difference between 15 and 25 or 20 and 25, the fatality rate actually goes up 80%. 25 miles per hour is that much worse because of the impact of the car at 25 on your body than whether it's 15 or 20. And on top of that, of course, if you're going slowly, you have more time, you see more, you have more time to react, to hit the brake, to slow down, to swerve. And so it's not only that if you hit the person, you're probably not going to kill him or her, but you're probably not going to hit him or her, because you're going to be able to slow down and swerve. And it's exactly the same as why Nantucket can have a granite obelisk in the middle of their street with no problem, while my co-author Victor Dover was sued for putting an obelisk in the street on a 30-mile-per-hour road, and somebody hitting it and having a very bad accident. So, winding up. Early in this book, there were a couple of things happening in New York that Victor and I decided to do some little demonstrations. This is the heart of Greenwich Village. The street in the middle, going more or less north-south, is Bleecker Street. The bottom street going across is Christopher, and the top street is 10th Street. And the historic center of Greenwich Village, which existed before, when Manhattan was a little pocket down on the bottom of the island, Greenwich Village was up here by itself. And its historic center was here, and the village well was right there. And for historic reasons, the grids shift a little bit here. And so you have what is actually a very nice space. Just this little subtle shift in the grid actually makes a very nice space where Bleecker comes down and shifts over. But as you can see, it's now got all the traffic engineered detritus so that you can drive down Bleecker at 45 and you'll see it. It's auto scale, it's not people scale. Here's a Google Street View of what it looks like along the street. And again, we're used to this. so Jane Jacobs lived like 2 blocks away, so we designed Jane Jacobs Square. And we took the street and we did an attached plaza on one side, so that the street now goes straight and dead ends. And possibly on a speed table, which a speed table is like a big speed bump. You go up, but you stay up. Possibly a speed table. But, you know, announcing to the car that came in here, watch out, so that the car would inevitably slow down. And this would become a very pleasant place in the center of Greenwich Village for outdoor dining, which New Yorkers love to do because they pay enormous amounts of rent for very small places, and they like to get out and enjoy public life. And in the retrofitted streets chapter, we did this for Second Avenue. Second Avenue, you may know, is currently under construction for the subway. So it's completely dug up. So you can't do anything to it, because the curbs and the gutters and things are gone. And what New York is going to do to it is they're going to roll out the same one-way arterial that they roll out every place else. Even though on the Upper East Side, this is the main outdoor dining street and main shopping street. And so we took the example of a promenade of something like some of the more formal Ramblas in Barcelona. And we put a center space where you could walk down and you could have outdoor dining. And because there's a new subway underneath it, you really don't, you know, you can diminish the capacity of the street. You do not have to do a street that induces suburban traffic driving in and out of the city. And I will say, my office is very near Lafayette Street. If you know Lafayette, it's a broad, very broad street. It's only 8 blocks long. And it's a perfect street for something like this. And the city has done the arterial, and without a question, all this bright paint has induced traffic. There's more traffic. There are now big buses parking there, and it's going faster than it used to. So this is the view of Second Avenue before the subway. This obviously was not a very pleasant place to dine, and yet people will pay, you know, $180 or $2 to sit there next to the truck and eat. This was our section. This was our competition board. And then the last thing, Victor has done a lot of work in places like Fairfax Boulevard, the type of work I was talking about, of, you know, how do you turn the big suburban arterial into the Champs-Élysées? And he's found, and urbanists have found, that this visualization is very good. So if you go through a series, you know, the first step is you do street improvements. And you can see what he's done is added side roads to the parking lot. So it's still a parking lot. And then the next stage is you put in liner buildings in the parking lot. And then the next stage is you know, by this time the developers are saying, oh look, there's something going on here. And they come in and they build bigger buildings. And so things get better. And you go from this to that. And we're about to meet with the city about Queens Boulevard. And I think this shouldn't be too much for them, but we'll see. Victor went to Virginia Tech. And any minute now, no, it was supposed to move. It was supposed to pan over to that. Jane Jacobs Square. So the last thing is, so we did a petition. What became obvious to us and to many other people is that the functional classification system does not work in the United States, in the walkable areas. And so we did this petition to change the system in places that are walkable or that want to be walkable
I just wanted to say a couple things. That, I've known John for 30 years, and John has never changed. John was talking like this 30 years ago, and it's taken the rest of us to catch up to what he's been saying for 30 years, and it's cost him a lot. He's not been believed, he's not been followed, but he's stuck to his guns, and now people are catching up, and he's always asked, all the rest of us have looked at the algorithms, the charts, the ledgers, the numbers, and we live our lives like that, and John has always said, but wait a minute, look at it, it's ugly. Why would anyone want to go there? And it turns out that what John is talking about is the way we all should be living, and what can bring back prosperity and community and all the things that make cities great places to live. And I, for one, am glad I've known you all these years.
And I might say that unfortunately he had to leave early, but I mean, I think New Haven has some good people like House
Yeah.
Farm.
And we've got Steve, and we've got a lot of good people, I think. that
Who, who are part of the tipping point that's happening.
We are, and if you go to city meetings, you'll see the two sides still there. We are at a tipping point right at this moment in time, and I don't think New Haven is at the head of the class, but they're certainly in there, and I think there's opportunity that people are beginning to realize. Yeah.
Yeah, so a question to that point, New Haven is certainly, moving along, but there are other towns, some of us here from like Stamford, Connecticut, which doesn't know many of this. Any thoughts on, and this is a culture change.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you cause culture to change?
You know, the reason why we did this petition was because it's not a lot of fun beating your head against a wall, telling people, you're living the wrong way, you should live the way I tell you to live. It's much easier to say, if you want your city to be walkable, if you have a boulevard and you want to make it walkable, then do this, and then the people who want that come to you, and the people who don't, but I do think, I grew up in Darien. I can remember Stamford changing into what it was. I can remember actually when from Darien to what's, I forget the name of the shopping plaza, but it actually was a long drive to go from Darien to that shopping plaza on the other side, because it was all two-way streets and they were slow. And once they put in those big arterials, it got easier to drive right across Stamford. But I gave this presentation recently at the RPA, and which is the Regional Plan Association of New York, and they have an office in Stamford. And one of their board members is the old head of Whitney Bowes, and he's enormously interested in what can we do to get Stamford to do something. And the way, I think Robert will agree, the way New Urban has succeeded was first by doing things like those visualizations and showing people, you may think you're going to hate Seaside, but actually, look at this drawing, you're going to love Seaside. And then once Seaside got built, everyone started copying it. And so, where New Urbanism caught on is where there was a good example built. So that if New Haven does some really good streets, you should expect that Hartford and Stamford and Bridgeport are all going to start looking.
Well, also, I don't think it's a case of leadership. Having been one bashing my head against it for 40 years, I can tell you it's a frustrating there's a growing want of people, as John mentioned, that are sort of beginning to appreciate different things. I think post-war in America, I mean, all that incredible capacity that America had to build all that war material that got switched over to the incredible manufacturing that went on. The construction of garages and shopping centers that just went skyrocketing right after in the mid-40s, in the late 40s after the war. And so I think there was a want to really capitalize on that, take advantage of it, and the cities were all abandoned. But I think that there's a growing want now to sort of rediscover the great human condition that can go on in the city, and it's missing. And so I think it's easier now to talk about these things even. I mean, somebody like John, I mean, I think you weren't thinking he was crazy, right? Whereas 30 years ago, people thought this sort of stuff was nuts.
And also, I think Vision Zero is a great thing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, now the mayor of Blasio has said we're going to 0 traffic deaths in 10 years. How can any politician ever turn that around and say, oh no, we're going to go back to 10,000 traffic deaths? You know, you can't do it. I do think it's the next DUI.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it isn't about how do we do this, it's kind of the excitement of being at this point in time where there's a want for it and a capacity and a knowledge of how to do it that's been under the, shelter for a long time. But there are what, about 3,000 or 4,000 urbanists
Well, they're also,
that have been cranking away at this for 40 years.
I mean, there's street squad and
Yeah.
there are all sorts of people around.
But there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people who have been trying to figure this out and been studying it. And so the knowledge is there. How you do it, what works, what doesn't work, is all there. So it's just a question now of the people that want to do it.
And don't forget the knowledge is there. $10 off for this signed copy.
That's right. These books, this book that John's been talking about is on sale in the front. John will sign it. He's giving $10 off, special for the CNU, which, by the way, I forgot to mention. Don't tell anybody, because I'm the president. So I'll probably lose my job, I hope. But anyway, the Congress of Urbanism New England chapter is sponsoring tonight. And so thank you all for your donations. It's going to a good cause. And as I said, John is giving this book, selling the book for $10 off if you want to buy it at the front, and he will sign it.
So, first of all, I like the fact that the foreword to your book was written by Prince Charles and the afterword by James Howard Custer. That's covering a lot of bases there. But my question is about how you evaluate the Bloomberg Jeanette Sadekhan legacy in New
I don't know what pressures were on her for what she did and what she did because she had to and what she did because she wanted to. And, I mean, I know the squares she did because she wanted to. The rest, she's never gonna tell us, what she was forced to do. And I do know that Mayor Bloomberg got lots of criticism of her from people he listened to. But on the other hand, she now works for him, so. He started an urban SWAT team, and he's taken his planning commissioner and his DOT commissioner and some others, and they're working together. So obviously he does support what they did.
Is his foundation spending money to support, new urbanist ideas or?
No. In a word, no.
That would be fun.
And Amanda Burton, who was his planning commissioner, loves architecture. She loves Frank Gehry. She loves, Richard Rogers. I've met with Jeanette twice. She's been very friendly because friends are friends. And in fact, she called me up at one time. She said, "Any friend of Hank's is a friend of mine when you want to come in." And also said the Bloomberg administration does not hire new urbanists. So the word, in a word, no, he does not support new urbanism. And it's not because of him, it's because of Amanda.
How do you see this new urban street classification that the US DOT could create working? And secondly, but related, do you see a danger in the complete streets policies contributing to separatist streets where there's an accommodation for each mode that is very clear that an engineer can point to? How do you formalize a solution where everything's kind of mushed together?
I know all the complete streets top people, and it's not a criticism of them to say design is not what they're interested in. They're not against good design, they're not for good design. What they're for is writing policy and getting policy adopted. And again, that's not a criticism, it's just that's what they do. And they will not cause any bad streets to be built, and neither will they, they've improved things by making complete streets. And now it's up to other people to make their complete streets completer.
So if we were to adopt the complete street,
New Haven has a complete street policy, I think.
so is there, and I've been told that it's a model that is one of the better ones around.
Right, but it's policy, it's not form. There's nothing wrong with saying streets should have bicycle lanes and sidewalks and buses. But it doesn't tell you how to do that. And that's what's both good and bad about complete streets. It's up to New Haven to decide what that complete street is, what the form of that complete street is.
So I guess as you said, it's a start in the transition.
I mean, even that horrible Florida complete street is better with sidewalk and a bike lane than without it.
Yeah, just to maybe restate, what a lot of us do, and I'm constantly in these meetings where things meet the numbers. They meet to just say it's mixed use. That sounds good, and it is good. But the true test is what is the experience of, mixed use on the street out here, mixed use on, as Matt Emerson was pointing out, on Crown Street, up where Istanbul compiled all these measurements that they took over the period of about a year, and those created the different codes for the different streets in this community called Seaside. And the streets got built, they didn't look anything like the streets that inspired them from Charleston or whatever, but they did capture the character and the feeling of being friendly to people. This thing John talked about, where if you go to Seaside, and I've taken a few people to Seaside, I don't think they're in this room now, but there were a couple here before. You can let a 5-year-old go, and you don't even have to be told that. You just know that it's safe to let your 5-year-old go. And I've gone down there with other families, and they say this is the first time I've ever felt I was on vacation with their young kids. So that's the difference, is what is the experience that you're creating? And you can start off just by going to places that have that, and somebody has made an incredible study that no matter what our background is, what our income level is, we all are attracted to the exact same streets. So it isn't magic, it isn't something you gotta go to college for or special school. You just, when you come to a street you like it. We all do. We all like the same things. And that's why John can talk about elm trees. Because we like them. And so why are we preventing ourselves from doing things that we all like? Which has been a tough road to hoe. But it isn't hard, is the answer.
There's also, you talked about the mixed use contributing. You have great mixed use here. If your street would support it a little more, you'd be doing a lot better with this building. You know?
Exactly. The slide that John showed of, what was it, 86th Street or something, where the sidewalk came out, the same thing happened here in Haven. You can see it today. If you walk out on this sidewalk out here and look west on Chapel Street, you'll notice that when Chapel Street gets to the green, the curb is over 12 feet. Didn't used to. And actually the curb was further out, even on this street. But the curb has been taken away, and although I'm not sure about that, because our building is the last building that still has granite sidewalks. And in fact, the edge of our building is the curb. You can go in the basement and go right out to the curb. You can look up and see the curb, and right past that is where the traffic's all going. In fact, that's why we have flower pots out there. We're so worried that trucks are going to drive up on our, it's about this thick granite with the basement. So I don't know whether the curbs were changed in this part of the Chapel, is what I'm getting at. But you can see when it gets up to the green, where they didn't have any pushback, and all the way around the green, 12 feet was taken away from the green to make the streets wider, so that the traffic on all but one